Okay, a good afternoon to you and welcome to another lecture. We're continuing on this channel to learn about Adventist pioneers and some of their understanding of the scriptures. And the reason why we're learning is because I want you to understand at last what where they were trying to get to, what they were trying to achieve. And so in this video, we're not going to dwell on an individual Adventist pioneer, but we're going to look at the Adventist diet and the Adventist health message. And we're going to be looking at it to find out if we follow the Adventist diet, will we go to heaven or will we not go to heaven for not following it? So that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to see if the Adventist diet is truly biblical, as they say, or it's a classic case, again, of not understanding the scriptures because of a lack of knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures or the Hebrew Bible. This video is also preliminary to Uriah Smith. So in the Adventist Pioneer series, I've been dealing a lot with other pioneers, especially James White, because he's the biggest contributor to Adventist beliefs and the pillars and the core of Adventist theology. But in the next videos, we're going to be looking at Uriah Smith because we must come to Daniel chapter 2. And it is in Daniel chapter 2 where you're going to understand for the first time in your life the true meaning of the statue and its different metallic components and what it means in relation to the world that we live in today. But before we study chapter 2, we must understand Daniel chapter 1 and understand the diet that Daniel chose, and together with his three brothers or two brothers, we must understand what is superstitious in Adventist thinking, and we must also understand the plain, simple meaning of what the Bible is saying, to know what the Bible is saying and what the Bible is not saying. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. I think my internet's a bit slow today, but I'm going to work with it as best possible. So if you have your Bible with you, just even though it's your Christian Bible, just go to Daniel chapter 1. And if you're privileged to have a Tanakh, a Hebrew Bible, just go to Daniel Aleph, which is Daniel 1, chapter 1, and you'll be reading more or less what I'm reading. Because you must remember, translations are not the real message. The real message is in the Hebrew text. All right, what is my technology doing now? My technology is migrating, but let me keep an eye on it. Yeah, I want to show this. Perfect. Sorry, I'm just going to have some water. All right, so this is Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger, just a touch bigger, maybe 200 plus, so that it fills the screen nicely. This is Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to read mostly the translation, and when necessary, I'm going to show you what it says in the Hebrew, okay? So it says here, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, the king of Yehuda, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. So we are reading from translation. It says here, Bishnat Shalosh lemalkut Yehoiakim. So it says the same thing in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, and it says here, Melech Yehuda, king of Judah, Ba Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel. And then what happened? Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, what did he do? Yerushalayim Vayatzar Eleha, which means he came to Jerusalem to lay siege. Okay, that's good. So the translation so far is good. The sovereign delivered Jehoiakim of Judah into his power. It says here, Vaiten Adonai, the sovereign. You see in English, in the translation, the sovereign is in capitals, is in a capital letter. So the sovereign, meaning God, the sovereign. The reason why it says Adonai, or the sovereign, is because in Israel, God is our king. God is not an abstract person up there that has no interest in earth. God is our king. He created the earth because he wanted to be king on the earth, and we can dwell with him in his kingdom. So he is our Adon. Our Adon means our Lord. He lords over us. So he is our sovereign. That's why it says Vaiten. So Vaiten says he gave, or our Lord gave, Be'ado, with his hands, et Yehoiakim melech Yehuda umiktzat kelei beit Elohim vayeviem eretz shinar, which means the sovereign delivered King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power. Whose power is this? Together with some of the vessels of the house of God. So his here is Nebuchadnezzar. And he brought them into the land of Shinar, which is Bavel, or Babylon. To the house of his God, it deposited the vessels into the treasury of his God. Now, I want you to understand that whenever the nations of the world take the Jewish people or the Israelites into captive, it's not because they had power over the people of Israel. It's because the sovereign, our God, our Father in heaven, has given us into the hands of our enemies. So our enemies always make the mistake of taking the vessels of God into the house of their gods. Whenever they take the things of the house of God, of the temple in Jerusalem, into the house of their gods, they bring upon themselves judgment, destruction, and a curse. Not just a curse that will last for 1 generation or 2 generations, but a curse that is perpetual as long as the earth will last. For example, if we talk about Iraq today, it was sacked. The Iraqi people were living under a dictatorship, a brutal dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, and then they endured a brutal invasion from the Americans. Today, Iraq is a nothing country because they took upon themselves the vessels of God, and they put them into the houses of their gods many thousands of years ago in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. So it's a very serious thing to take what is holy from the temple and put it or dedicate it to your own gods. That spells your own doom, your own destruction. So Babylon today or Iraq is not a power in the world. It's just history, ancient history. It continues to say, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief officer, to bring some Israelites of royal descent and of nobility. I want to clarify something, that it was not only the Jews that were exiled into Babylon. When I say Jews, it's because sometimes when Jewish people tell their history, they tell it as if the title Jew is only for people from Judea. The title Jew is not only for the people of Judea, and it's not a title that comes from the Bible to be called a Jew. It's the nations that looked at the people of Judah and Israel, and they couldn't tell the difference, and they called them all Judeans. The word or the name Jew does not even mean Yehuda. It comes from Judea, the homeland of the Yehudi. So when the nations started to call the people of the south of Judea Yehudim, they were talking about everyone who follows the Torah. And that's why the Bible here, or the Tanakh, says, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief officer, to bring some Israelites. We are all Israelites in the house of Israel. We, the children of Jacob, we, the children of Israel, we are Israelites. And you will see later in this chapter that there will be a request from the king for nobility. When the king requests for nobility, that's the only time where the Judeans are removed from the Israelites because they are from the house of David. Okay? But let's not hurry there. Let's keep reading. It says, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief officer, to bring some Israelites of royal descent and nobility. Now, what does it say here? Israel umizera hamaluka. Hamaluka means royalty. It says here Israel, which means Jews and the 10 tribes, people who are descended from the 10 tribes who were still around. And it says umizera, and the seed or the descendants of nobility, hamalucha, nobility. So in the house of Israel, nobility, the true nobility, comes from the house of Judah, because God said that the scepter of Israel, the ruling class of Israel, will always be from Judah. So from Judah, the princes are called into the royal Babylonian court. The king demanded youths without blemish, which means they are not handicapped, and they don't have blemishes literally on their skin. They don't have one leg longer than the other one. They have perfect symmetry. They must be handsome and proficient in wisdom. One second. They must be proficient in the wisdom of their country. So what does it mean in wisdom? Wisdom is mathematics, it's literature, it is also astrology and other sciences, but basically mathematics, literature, and astrology. That's what ancient wisdom or Eastern wisdom puts as a basis or the foundation of what is called wisdom. So they must be proficient in all wisdom and be knowledgeable and intelligent and capable of serving in the royal palace. Now, the reason why there must be nobility is because they must be familiar with the palace and teach the writings and the language of the Chaldeans. So now there's an imposition upon them to learn the language of the Chaldeans. What was the language of the Chaldeans? That's Aramaic, because Shinar is Aram. Aramaic they must teach and learn and teach Aramaic to who? The subjects of Babylon. Later in the book of Ezra, when we find that after 70 years the Babylonian exile is over, Ezra returns to Israel with 50,000 Jews. He returns with the prophet Nehemiah and also with a holy man named Mordechai. And then they reestablish the court of the 70 elders in Jerusalem. Now, the reason why I mention this is because these returning Jews, 70 years after chapter 1, these Jews that then return to Jerusalem, they did not speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic. And from then on, the Jews would speak Aramaic and use Hebrew only as a language of learning the Torah, as we are doing now in this video. But of course, I assume, and I must assume, that those of you that are watching, you are only coming out of the churches. None of you are Jews or Israelites. I can talk about this and I can say we and us because I know for a fact that I'm a biblical Israelite. And so, from your perspective, it is important that you know that the Jews used, or the Israelites used, Aramaic as common speech, everyday common speech. But when it was time to study the Torah, we use Hebrew. And you are very privileged watching this video that you can be able to read and understand with me the Hebrew meaning. If you don't speak Hebrew or understand Hebrew, on the same channel, I have about 13 episodes or 13 lessons on basic biblical Hebrew. You should go to the Biblical Hebrew playlist. Now, verse 5 says, the king allotted daily rations to them, meaning the captives, these royal captives that were called to the king's house. The king allotted daily rations to them from the king's food and from the wine he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's service. Now we are coming close to the Adventist thinking. We're coming to clarify Adventist thinking about diet. It says here, 2 things were offered. The king's food over here. The king's food is offered, and the king's wine is offered. I must explain to you that in Judaism, or before there was even a term called Judaism, in the kingdom of the Israelites don't eat food that was prepared by non-Israelites. Forget the term Jews and Jewish for a little bit. We don't eat food that is not prepared by people who are not Israelites. We don't eat especially meat that is not kosher. We don't drink wine that is not kosher. Now, what does it mean, wine that is not kosher? Isn't wine the same? It's not the same, because when somebody prepares or is making wine, their mindset affects their wine. It's called kavanah. So if I'm making wine and all I'm thinking about is I just want to get drunk, or I'm busy making this wine and I'm thinking about, you know what? It was really nice to kill that guy. I should go and just finish off his whole family. Or I'm thinking about, oh, that woman last night was a joy to be with. So this non-Jew or non-Israelite has the wrong kavanah, the wrong mindset and meditative spirit while they are making the wine. So if a non-Jew or a non-Israelite is going to make wine, they must be under the supervision of a rabbi. But it's always best that the people of Israel make their own wine. They don't buy it from a regular shop. So that's why we have kosher wine. That's why we have kosher food. And this is why in the Tanakh we are reading that the king wanted to give them his food and his wine. That's why food and wine are specifically mentioned in this verse, because it says among these nobles were Judahites, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So there's four of them: Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael, and Azariah. And it says here the chief officer gave them new names, which is not kosher. Daniel was called Belteshazzar or Belshazzar. It's not a kosher name because it doesn't have God's name in it. Daniel has God's name. There it is. El is God's name. There it is. Hananiah is a Hebrew name. It's kosher. Mishael has God's name. It's kosher. Azariah is a Hebrew name. It's kosher. But they were given unkosher names like Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which are unkosher names. So the king wants to give them unkosher food, but also the king is giving them unkosher names. So out of these four, we don't hear much about the leadership of the three. But Daniel takes leadership, and it says Daniel resolves not to defile himself with the king's food or wine. And there's a reason why, again, it is mentioned the word defile and food and wine again. Because if an Israelite or a Jew eats non-kosher food, they bring spiritual impurity into their bodies. That affects their connection to the Torah and their connection to God. Their soul is stained. So Daniel did not want to stain his Jewish soul. He did not want to lose his connection with God. He did not want to defile his body. So he did not want to drink, it says, or eat the king's food. It says, so he sought permission of the chief officer not to defile himself. And God disposed the chief officer to be kind and compassionate towards Daniel. Now let's get into the Adventist thinking about food and diet. The Adventists will say, you see, he mustn't defile himself with wine because wine is wrong. The Bible has never said that wine is wrong. On the contrary, wine is very important in a person's worship of God because you make a blessing over wine, and wine elevates the person's spirit towards God. It's because they do not understand the culture, the language, and the thinking. Thinking is thought, Jewish thought. So an Adventist will argue and say, but in Proverbs it says wine is a mocker, blah, blah, blah. Give wine to those who are perishing and strong drink to those who have no hope. That's a classic example of taking the scriptures out of context. King Solomon was talking about people, especially kings and princes, that did not want to study the Torah, and they would rather drink wine in the morning, lost their faith. So the context is very important. Nowhere does the Bible says that wine is evil or alcohol is evil. The only thing that the Bible teaches is moderation. Moderation in food, moderation in drink, moderation in sexual activity, moderation in social contact. That's why Enoch in the Bible, it says Enoch walked with God for 300 years, is because Enoch used to live in his house for 6 days a week. 6 days a week he was inside. One day of the week he would go out and socialize and do some shopping and teach people about God. And then when he had satisfied his social needs, he would go back to his house and commune with God. So the Bible always teaches us a balance. So from an Adventist point of view, the Adventists get their bias from evangelical Christianity. And evangelical Christianity gets its sectarian thinking from the Western world in America, where people take political corners or political stances in order to define their communities. In other words, the Adventist stance on diet has nothing to do with the Bible. So Azariah, Mishael, Daniel, and who's the fourth one? Hananiah. They were not building an Adventist health message. Daniel wasn't building an Adventist health message. Daniel was saying, we want to keep kosher. We don't want the food that the king eats. It's important for you to understand what the Tanakh is not saying here. The Tanakh is not saying, the Bible is not saying that the Jews in captivity were rejecting the king's food, because the other Israelites and the other Jews that were not called to the royal court, like the four, they were not serving in the royal court, those Jews were able to eat meat and drink wine, because even though they were captives in Babylon, they were able to set up their own wineries and their own kosher slaughterhouses. Because you must remember, the Babylonian captivity did not force the Jews to become Babylonians. The Jews could continue being Jews or Israelites in captivity. That's why in 70 years, King Cyrus is going to allow the Jews to go back and be themselves, because what the Babylonians basically wanted was Jewish taxes, the Jewish intellect, and benefits of having Jews as your slaves. So the other Jews and other Israelites were able to eat kosher. What makes this the case of these four special is because they were called to the royal court to serve. So Daniel says, I cannot eat the king's food and I cannot drink his wine. This, to any other, or should I say rather, in any culture of the world, it's an insult to the people of that culture to refuse their food and their drink. It's usually looked upon as an insult, and people will treat you not as a visitor, but as an invader in their country, because you are coming with your own customs and you are rejecting their way of life. This is the price that you pay for being an Israelite and a Jew. Unfortunately, throughout history, Jews and Israelites who are not strong in their faith, they assimilated to the cultures that we were exiled into, and they did not hold on 100% to their heritage. That's how in America you have Jews that eat pork. In other countries, even in Israel you have non-religious Jews who are Jews only by birth, but they have no interest in religion. They made Aliyah. They came from Russia and Eastern Europe, where they were eating salo, which is pig fat, smoked pig fat, in Ukraine and Russia. And because they got a taste of pork, in Tel Aviv today, there's one or two butcheries, secret butcheries I might call them, that sell pig meat to other Jews that eat pork secretly. So it's a problem, assimilation. It's always been a problem. It still is a problem today. For example, I'm not going to tell you his name, but he's a famous Jewish chef who's in the famous television networks. He makes no apology about being Jewish in his TV show, but he also makes no apology about eating pork. So unfortunately, this is the price of exile, where Jews forget, Israelites forget that they're Israelites and they assimilate to other cultures. Not only in America, but my own Israelite people in Africa, in Southern Africa, when they assimilated to the Xhosa nations and the Xhosa cultures, they started eating pork as well. In my family, when God started to take us out of exile 30 or so years ago, before we found ourselves in the Adventist movement, the first thing that God did when he was taking us out of exile was to make us to stop eating pork, because we had assimilated to the closer nations and we started eating pork like they eat pork. So God started to wean us off the pork and reminded us to become Shomer Shabbat, or keepers of the Sabbath. But my parents didn't know much about the keeping of the Sabbath. They looked for the Sabbath, but they didn't know about Judaism. They'd never heard of it, even though we have Israelite heritage. So they decided that we would go to an Adventist church because their mindset was still on Christianity. So my family was never evangelized by Adventists. We never received Bible studies from Adventists. We chose to walk into an Adventist church because we were looking for our Israelite Shabbat, our Sabbath. Unfortunately, we spent 30 years too long in the Adventist church and we did not look for the Torah. But I thank God that even when I was a child, I had the consciousness of being Jewish. I always asked my father questions about the Torah, and of course, he did not have answers for me. And throughout my school career, especially in high school, my Israelite or Jewish consciousness was great, because during the special occasions or meeting times, which we call Moedim in Hebrew, like Passover, I was very conscious to make matzah and to eat matzah during Chag HaMatzot. A Chag Matzot is 7 days where we are eating matzah. So at school, I was always carrying matzah. Whenever a Moed, a Jewish holiday, came by, I felt it in my blood. I say 30 years too long because I have regrets about being Seventh-day Adventist. I have huge regrets, but it was necessary for us to get reacquainted with the Sabbath. As a result, we never really accepted Adventist doctrines and teachings. They were very strange to us. The only reason why we stayed with the Adventists so long is because of the Sabbath, the Shabbat, which is our heritage, our Israelite heritage. But 7 years ago, I thank God, because while I was at the Seventh-day Adventist University here in Argentina, where I am right now, but not at the Adventist University this time, when I was at that university 7 years ago, my consciousness about my Jewishness started to get stronger, and I started to study the Torah. Long story short, here I am teaching you, who is coming out of Christianity, not just only Seventh-day Adventism, you who has an Israelite heritage, or you that has no Israelite heritage, but you love God and you want to know biblical truth. Here I am sharing with you the true meaning of the Bible. To that I say, Baruch Hashem Leolam Ba'ed, which is blessed be God forever and ever. So Daniel resolved not to eat unkosher food. Now, it doesn't mean that he decided not to eat meat because he was not going to heaven. The Adventists have been teaching a wrong message for 160 years, teaching people that if you eat meat, you're not going to go to heaven. If you drink alcohol, you're not going to go to heaven because it's a sin. Now, the Adventists are going to argue and say, we never taught that. It's not part of our doctrines. But go into any Adventist church, listen to any pastor, they will demonize meat and they will demonize alcohol. Two things that are a gift from God, and they will tell you, you will not go to heaven if you eat those things. The problem with sectarian thinking in the Western world is that if you control people's food and drink, then you can control those people. You can control that community. So food and drink is a matter of control in the Western world, not in the Eastern biblical world. And it says God disposed of the chief officer to be kind and compassionate towards Daniel. The chief officer, the translation says, said to Daniel, I fear that my lord the king, who allotted food and drink to you, will notice that you look out of sorts, which means you look gaunt and thin if you don't eat meat. Sorry, not meat, if you don't eat the king's food, because the Tanakh doesn't say meat. It doesn't say Daniel said, I don't want the meat. Daniel says, I don't want the king's food. That includes meat, fruits, vegetables, rice, whatever. But he would rather eat what? He would rather eat legumes. Let's go back. It says, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food and wine. Let's read in Hebrew. Does it talk about meat? This is because now we are confronting the Adventist false teaching about meat being a sin and people eating meat not going to heaven. It says here, Vayasem Daniel al libo asher lo yatga'al befat gal hamelech. So hamelech ve ויבקש משר הסריסים אשר לא יתגאל. So what does it say here? It doesn't say, for example here, לא יתגאל בשר בפת בגל. It doesn't say he doesn't eat basar. Basar is meat. It doesn't say basar. It says food. So the Adventists say that he did not want to eat meat because meat makes you spiritually weak. Ellen White supposedly writes and says it makes you unfit to study the Bible if you eat meat. That's sectarian thinking. The people who wrote the Bible under the inspiration of God, the prophets, the writers, they were eating traditional Hebrew food. What is the traditional Hebrew food or Israelite food? In the books of Israel, it says, our forefathers woke up in the morning, they did prayers, they prayed to God, and after praying to God, after doing their morning prayers, they took water and they took bread, they broke from the bread and ate and drank water. And when they were eating in the evening, eating dinner, our food of all time as Israelite people is meat and bread. That is the biblical food, meat and bread. Why would a biblical people who wrote the Bible, not eat meat because they think they are not going to go to heaven? It's a stupid idea. It is stupidity. It's what happens when a foreign people who are not Israelites or Jews take our sacred books and they pretend to know how to interpret them. So a lot of Adventist people around the world are unhealthy because they don't eat meat. My personal friend, whom I love dearly, who's from Cape Town, she decided to become a vegan, a good Adventist, because she wanted to go to heaven. She wanted to become a vegan. I'm just making one example. There are literally thousands of Adventists, even more, tens of thousands, who are suffering the same, but they will never say it. They will never admit. She became a vegan. She became an absolute Adventist, not eating meat. And then she took it to another extreme of not eating eggs and lactose, and her hair started to fall off. She became sick and her hair started to fall off. Dear friends of ours who are avid Adventists, they decided as a family to be the best Adventist model according to the Ellen White books about diet. They all got kwashiorkor, they got sick because they did not get animal fat. Animal fat is the essence of life for the human body. That's why after the flood, when other plants and seeds were no longer available, God says you must eat basar. Basar in Hebrew, in English, is flesh. You can kill an animal and eat it because now nutrition is very limited after the flood, after Noah's flood and ark. What did Noah eat when he was in the in the ark. Maybe he stored himself some vegetables, but I don't know of any vegetable that was going to last 1 year at sea and remain fresh. I don't know any grain or seed that's going to sit at sea for 1 year without being salted and without rotting. So God says to Noah, you must take into the ark the animals 2 by 2 of those animals that are not clean. Take them into the ark 2 by 2. If you want to know clean and unclean animals, obviously go to Leviticus chapter 11. And then God says to Noah, of the clean animals, don't take them 2 by 2 into the ark, take 7 of each. Why did God say take 7 of each? Because these animals in the ark were obviously going to multiply. Noah was going to need these animals and his family to make sacrifices to God and to eat, to have food to eat. What is Adventism and who are the Adventists to think that they know the truth? They have the keys to the interpretation of the Bible. They have the keys to heaven and earth. Who the hell do they think they are? Here the Bible tells us nothing about meat. It says Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine that he drank, because it was not kosher, not because it was food or wine. And it says God made the chief officer kind and compassionate towards Daniel because it was necessary for Daniel to eat kosher food and also for the other 3 Jews to be able to eat kosher food. It's not meat or vegetables that make you intelligent and spiritual. It's whether the food, the meat, is kosher or not kosher. There are many vegetables in the world today that are not kosher because they've been genetically modified. They're not kosher. So it's a question of kashrut. It's a question of what's kosher and not kosher. Adventism doesn't know anything about kashrut, the laws of keeping kosher. So leave the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, to the Hebrews. If you don't know the meaning of them, then the Adventist pastors and the theologians must go to the Jews and learn the true meaning of the Bible. Then they can claim to be the people of the book. Adventists have no right, no justification of calling themselves the people of the book. That's replacement theology. The true people of the book are the Jews. So if the Adventists want to be orthodox, the people of the book, if they want to claim to know the Bible or have received the light of God, they must learn from the Jewish rabbis. The chief officer said to Daniel, I fear that my lord, the king, who allotted food and drink to you, will notice that you look out of sorts, unlike the other youths of your age, and you will put my life in jeopardy with the king. So the fear was that if they didn't eat the delicious food of the king, the sugar, the spices, the chocolates, all these wonderful desserts, and they would not be in good health. They would be thin and feeble of mind. But Daniel replied to the guard whom the chief officer had put in charge. It says in the Bible, in the translation of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Daniel says, please test your servants for 10 days, giving us legumes to eat and water to drink. It says here in Hebrew, Nasna, or please, towards us, Nasna et avadecha, which means your servants, yamim asara, 10 days. Ve'etnu lanu min hazeroim v'nochela umayim v'nishter, which means Please give us zeroim, hazeroim. So to have a proper translation here, it doesn't say, please test your servants. It doesn't say giving them or giving us legumes. It says, let us eat from, min hazeroim. Let us eat from the seeds, which means legumes. Now, this is where we blow the superstition out of the water. It's not the type of food. When Daniel says min hazeroim, zeroim does not only mean legumes. Zeroim means let us eat from the humble food, the simple food. Zeroim, simple, natural, healthy food. We don't want the complications of cheese sauce on top of a steak. We don't want the complications of a bechamel sauce for our vegetables. We don't want a cream to go into our pasta. We want zeroim. We want simple, uncomplicated food and water. This doesn't mean physical legumes. The Adventists are thinking, oh, he's asking for lentils and he's asking for chickpeas. He's not asking for chickpeas. He's not asking for legumes. He's asking for simple food. Because if you get simple food, you are able to keep kosher. What am I talking about? A Jewish person visits a city and all the restaurants in the city are not kosher because the meat is not kosher. They mix meat and cheese in those restaurants. Where can a hungry Jew visiting a city not his own be able to eat? A hungry Jew can eat in a vegetarian restaurant so long as there's no milk and there's no cream. The Jew can eat a plain vegetarian salad with maybe eggs or maybe no eggs. So this is what Daniel is thinking about. He's saying for us to be able to be intelligent and to serve the king in the court on an intellectual basis, we need hazeroim, this word here. We need simple food. We don't need complicated food. We don't need shepherd's pie because shepherd's pie has got too many ingredients. It's very complicated. We just want simple food. And if you eat simple food, it's easy to reject the king's unkosher meat and unkosher food. So a lot of people, because they cannot read Hebrew, they interpret the Bible in a literal sense. So the Adventists learn not from Hebrew, but from a Christian translation, a Western translation, that takes things literal and tells us about legumes. Legumes are literal, and they limit you to grains, but hazeroim means simple food. It doesn't have to be grains. It says, so Daniel continues to say, after we've eaten hazeroim, this simple food, please compare our appearance with that of the youths who eat of the king's food, and do with your servants as you see fit. So Daniel is challenging this guy. He's saying, after we have eaten simple kosher food and drank water and avoided unkosher wine, then compare us to other servants of the king. So the king's servant agrees to this plan of theirs and tested them for 10 days. Now, it's interesting. Daniel says, test us for Yamim Asara, 10 days. Yamim Asara. What's going to happen in 10 days? You will see results. Why 10 days? Why Yamim Asara? Now, the number 10 In biblical Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, the number 10 is the number of the hand. Okay? The hand, yad. So if you look here, this letter yud of Yamim Asarim, yud, this letter, its numerical value is 10. So he asks for Yamim Asarim, he asks for 10 days, yet the 10 days themselves, Yamim, they begin with the letter Yod or Yud, whose numerical value is 10. 10 is the hand, Yad. But also 10 are the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments do not stand alone, they are attached to the Torah. The numerical value, the gematria of the Torah is 10. So in other words, Daniel was saying to the king's servant, please let us keep kosher according to the Torah. Then you will see that the Torah will not only nourish our minds and our spirits, but the Torah will also nourish our physical bodies. It's because the word of God is called the bread of life. You cannot have money, you cannot have resources, but if you study the Torah and it enters your body, it will nourish you physically. So Daniel is saying, let us keep kosher. Let us keep our Torah. And you will see physically we will be healthier, stronger, and more intelligent, or as intelligent as other people. When the 10 days, again, the 10 days were over, they looked better and healthier than all the youths who were eating of the king's food. Now, in these past few verses, the number 10 has been mentioned 3 times, the number 10. So I've just explained to you that the number 10 means a hand, and it also means the Torah. But also, the letter, I must actually write this down, I think. Let me connect my, I need to connect my writing pad, because I really want to illustrate this the way I should be illustrating it, and I should have connected my writing tablet before I started this lecture. 1 second. You can fast forward this part if you want to as you're watching the video. You can just hit fast forward. Or if you're like me, patient, you can watch everything. You just connect this. To my laptop. That's connected. You can just fast forward this. I don't want to keep you waiting. Just fast forward it. Now I'm gonna need, now that I've done this, I'm gonna need my pen, my digital pen. Why does this thing doesn't want to sit? Okay, perfect. I'm gonna connect my pad. Play. Move away my keyboard somewhere safe. And then find my digital pen somewhere. Should be here. Some quick calibration so that I get the right setup. So, I hope you are learning something so far. You are seeing the importance of being able to read from Hebrew. If someone is teaching you the Bible and they are not teaching from the Hebrew, that Bible lesson is wrong, completely wrong, and there's nothing from God that you'll get from that. I know it sounds very extreme because you can learn something about God from a translation, but it'll be wrong because there's no Hebrew. So you will learn about God, but the wrong thing about God. Best thing to do is to split my screen into two and then share the whole screen. Let's do that. Present my double screen. Entire screen. There we go. Screen two. Et voila. All right. So I'm good to write. Let's go and draw. All right. So Daniel asks for 10 days. And these 10 days, Yamim Asera. There we go. So these Yamim Asera, the word Yam or Yamim starts with the letter Yod, which is here. So we have the word Yamim. This is the letter Yud. Some people say Yod. But he asks for 10 days. So the numerical value of Yad is 10. 10 means hand, but also 10 means the Torah. And of course, in the Torah, we find the 10 commandments. I'm sorry for the handwriting. I have an ugly handwriting, but I think my excuse is that I study medicine, so I must have a bad handwriting. It comes with the territory. So these 10 days are mentioned 3 times in these verses. That gives us 30. In the Hebrew language, 30 is the letter Lamed. The letter Lamed means staff or rod. So if we go into Jewish thinking a little bit, excuse me, in Jewish thinking, the staff is a leader, someone who leads. This letter represents a staff, which means a leader. Rod, disciplined. So what's going on here? What's going on here is that Daniel takes leadership of the 4 Hebrew boys. Daniel takes the position of a leader. Hence, so far, we see 10 days being mentioned 3 times. Because the Torah is hinting, it wants to tell us something, that it is through the leadership of Daniel that the Jews in the palace are going to keep kosher. And they, the 4 of them, will become leaders. They will become leaders over the non-Jewish wise men of Babylon. You see? If you want to hear this again, just rewind what I said. Stop the video and rewind it and listen to it again. So let's continue. It says here, when the 10 days were over, they looked better and healthier than all the youths that were eating of the king's food. Amen to that. So the guard kept on removing their food and wine, and that they were supposed to drink, and gave them literally legume. Well, we don't know if it's literal, so let's go back to the Hebrew before we say legumes. It says here, Vayehi hameltzar nose et pat bagam veyayin mishtehem venoten lahem zero zeronim. So let's go see now the difference in spelling. Here it says, Daniel says, we prefer to eat from simple food. Ha ze ro im. So let's write down what Daniel says in verse 11. Let me write this in a different color. In verse 11, please nota bene, take note. In verse 11, Daniel says, zero im. Says ha zero im. Okay. Right, there's an O sound over here. So ha zero im. I'm going to write this in Roman numerals. Ha zero im. This is verse 11. And I told you that this means simple food. Because if you eat simple food, there's no chance of breaking kashrut laws. And then we go down now to this verse. And this verse is different. It's altogether different because it says, Venoten lahem ze zeronim. The spelling is different. So in verse 17, it says he gave them zeronim. So here the Tanakh says different word, which is ze. Oops, it's meant to be ein. Zeronim. There's a nun. It's a completely different spelling. As zeroim, as I've written here, this one is zeronim with an N. Zeroim and zeronim. So they asked for simple food, and the God gave them zeronim. So let's quickly go and confirm in modern day language what zeronim are. You see, in the world of the Bible, and especially in Judaism, you don't just stand on the pulpit and you preach something you don't know anything about. You have to know exactly what it is you are teaching. Otherwise, you're doing damage to the Torah, to the Bible, and you're bringing disgrace to God's name. Again, if you don't like these segments where I'm quiet and I'm doing other things, please fast forward the video and save yourself the waiting. Good. So I want you to understand the difference between zeroim and zeronim. Here are biblical facts. Biblical fact number one regarding Daniel chapter 1 is that Daniel my pen's doing funny things. Daniel did not ask for legumes. He didn't ask for grains. Daniel did not ask for grains. He did not ask for grains because he thought if he ate meat, he was not going to go to heaven. That's fact number one. He did not. If you say that he asked for grains, you are changing the Bible. You are interpreting it wrong, but also you are forcing it to say something it did not say. It says here, it was the God that brought zeronim. Daniel asked for zeroim. Zeroim. The God gave them zeronim. Okay, so the God, he interpreted zeroim as legumes. Zeronim. See the difference? So Daniel did not ask for grains is fact number one. Fact number two, the God brought them legumes as, inverted commas, simple food. The simple food, the zeroim, that Daniel asked for. And the reason why the God did this is because the God never studied the kosher laws. He's not a Jew. He doesn't know what kosher laws are. but he brought him what he thought was kosher, which is what happens if you're a Jew or an Israelite. You go for a business meeting in a city and you hang around non-Jewish business people, and they want to buy you lunch and they know that you don't eat anything that's not kosher. They'll say, can I buy you at least a salad? That salad becomes zeroim, which means simple food. They don't say, you don't eat meat, eat grains. Because if you eat meat as a Jew or as a Bible-believing person, you're not going to go to heaven. That's the biggest load of stupidity under the sun. So when we look at the world of zeronim, which are legumes, you've got pumpkin seeds, you've got beans, you've got corn, you've got maize, you've got wheat, you've got all the simple things that do not require complications. Because what happens is if you've got corn, maize, peanuts, and whatever, you can roast them in a pan over the fire, and then when you finish roasting them, you can eat them. It's simple food. It's zeroim. The zeronim are zeroim. They are simple food. Continues to say that God made all of these young men intelligent and proficient in all writings and wisdom. I want you to see, it says that it's God who made them. It says here, the hayeladim of the boys, ha'ele of these boys, arba etam natan lahem ha-Elohim. He gave to them, who? God, Elohim. Madah ve hasekel bakol sefer vechokma ודניאל הבין בכל חזון וחלומות, which means of the 4 young men, God generously gave them proficiency, intelligence in writing and wisdom, and especially Daniel had understanding of visions and dreams of all kinds. It's important to understand that God made them intelligent. It was not the diet. In the Adventist world, they've been teaching that it's the vegetarian diet that made Daniel, Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael very intelligent. If you eat vegetables, you become spiritual, you become intelligent. The Adventists get it from Ellen White. I don't know where she got it from, because it's definitely not from the Bible. So it is not the food that made them intelligent. It is God. It's in the Bible. It's written in the Bible. It says God made them intelligent, not through food, but through blessing. God blessed them for wanting to keep kosher in a country that was not kosher. So the intelligence and the wisdom doesn't come from the food. It comes as a reward from God for having kept kosher it among a people that are not kosher. In simple words, God blessed them with wisdom and understanding, because in a world that is not Jewish, they decided to remain Jewish. They remained Israelites. So the lesson for you who's not yet an Israelite or a Jew, the lesson is very simple. If you do what God tells you to do, He will give you the wisdom. God will give you the wisdom. Sorry, Google is bothering me again. Yes, I'm still in the call. Please don't cancel anything. So the lesson for you who's coming out of the churches, who wants to know the biblical and Hebraic truth of the Bible, once you decide to do what God wants you to do, He starts giving you gifts like wisdom and understanding. It's not from the food. I promise you. When the time the king had set for their presentation had come, the chief officer presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them, all of them, and all none was equal to Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So these entered the king's service. So all the other ones that ate complicated food, all the rich and creamy and delicious and sugary food, they were not equal to Daniel, Hananiah, and Azariah, because the wisdom of keeping kosher elevated Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael, and Azariah. It doesn't mean that they were vegetarians and because they ate vegetables, they were of a higher spiritual level. That's stupid. Whenever the king put a question to them requiring wisdom and understanding, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and exorcists throughout his realm. The question is, why were they 10 times better than the magicians and exorcists? It's not because of vegetarianism. It's because of this. The number 10 is the Torah of Moses. It's the hand of God. God handed them the wisdom of the Torah to keep kosher. And because of the wisdom of the Torah, they became 10 times better than all the magicians throughout Babylon. Without Torah, there's no wisdom. That's why the Adventist interpretation, and indeed the Christian interpretation of the Bible, lacks wisdom and understanding, because they all reject the Torah as the Old Testament, which is irrelevant. So long as they call it old and they reject it, they will never have wisdom. There will always be a joke in the sight of God and the Jewish people with their false and wrong interpretations. Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So which means Daniel endured much of the Babylonian exile. Okay, good. We're going to stop here. We've finished chapter 1, and this lecture was a foundation to what I'm going to be talking about next, which is Uriah Smith, the Adventist pioneer, and also his teachings on Daniel and the Revelation, but specifically his teachings or Adventist teachings on Daniel chapter 2, which has got to do with the statue, which is a famous prophetic teaching of the Adventist world. And I will show you again where the Adventists make a mistake and where they should, if they are serious about God and the Bible, when and how and where they should go and consult with the Jewish people so that they can have the correct understanding. I hope you were blessed by this lecture and enlightened. Don't miss the next one. And in 2026, we've started the teachings. We're going to go from strength to strength. God bless you and keep you, and have a wonderful Shabbat of rest tomorrow. For those of you coming out of the churches, that means happy Sabbath.